I think it's the first time that a thoroughly researched alternative view of prehistory has been presented on a major platform.
This theory is something you've been thinking about and talking about for decades.
Yeah, I've been involved in it for a very long time. My thesis is that we have lost an episode of our story. During the Ice Age, there was a civilization on planet Earth. There were survivors. They attempted to reboot, and we're seeing the evidence for that. I don't think we're seeing the origins of civilization at the end of the Ice Age. I think we're seeing a reboot of civilization that existed previously. Don't look for ourselves in the past. Look for something different from ourselves, but nevertheless was capable of doing things that archaeologists tell us nobody was capable of doing at that time. We need more questions, not less questions. We need more competing narratives, not less competing narratives. And that's why I'm very disappointed in archaeology, in the way it's reacted to this, and in journalism, in the way that it's just taken on board what the archaeologists say without asking any questions at all. It's like a black hole. You almost recognize it by its absence. There's something missing in the past, and there's loads of anomalies that come down to it that can only be explained by a forgotten episode in the human story. So I've made it my business to be an advocate of that position, to question the mainstream narrative and to offer an alternative narrative. And I don't insist that people believe me. I just want to add it to the mixture of information that people receive, so that there's not this monopolistic control of information on our past that archaeologists have undeservedly enjoyed for the last century or so.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Graham Hancock, the British journalist, filmmaker, and best-selling author. Your career began over 40 years ago as a writer for some of Britain's leading newspapers, including The Times, The Independent, The Guardian, and The Economist. But since 1990, you have dedicated your life to researching and exploring ideas outside the mainstream narrative, where you believe that much of what we are told about our history is wrong. As an author, you've written 26 books, including the international bestsellers The Sign and the Seal, Heaven's Mirror, Fingerprints of the Gods, and the sequel, Magicians of the Gods, which have sold more than 5 million copies worldwide and been translated into 27 languages. Your latest venture, the Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse, sees you visit archaeological sites across the world to uncover evidence of an incredibly advanced ancient civilization that you believe existed thousands of years ago. The show has been a massive success and featured in the top 10 most watched Netflix shows in 31 different countries. Graham, welcome back to London Real.
Thanks, Brian. Good to be back with you.
Great to be here. It's been just over 10 years since you were first here, back in September 2012. This is your 5th appearance here.
Yeah.
And, a few months ago, I got this strange email where your production company was asking for a small little sliver
That's right,
of one of our shows together. And I couldn't have been more excited to get it to them. We just stopped everything here. We went and found it on the hard drives. And I was anticipating this series. We obviously had to keep everything quiet.
Yeah.
And then to watch it drop on Netflix, to see it like number 2 in the world, to watch that opening shot where you're walking people through your ideas, it made me feel great.
Good.
And the fact that the whole world got to finally see 30 years of your research and it to be so well produced, you put so much work into going to these sites. I've been reading your books for years and I didn't know a lot of the details of what you were talking about. What's this process been like of filming it, now seeing it, and then also dealing with all of the feedback or criticism, shall we say?
I think it's the first time that that a thoroughly researched alternative view of prehistory has been presented on a major platform. Of course, there are many shows which question the history of the human race, but my thesis is that we have lost an episode of our story. That during the Ice Age, there was a civilization on planet Earth, which was not an alien civilization. It didn't have anything to do with aliens. It was not any particular unique race of people. It was human beings who had risen slightly above the level of hunter-gatherer. The general view is that during the Ice Age, our ancestors were entirely hunter-gatherers. And that's not to say that they were unsophisticated or stupid. Hunter-gatherers are very smart people, and we still have hunter-gatherers living in the world today. And actually, if our civilization were to collapse, which is not by no means impossible, the people who would be most likely to survive on Earth are the hunter-gatherers, not us in so-called advanced industrial civilizations. I'm actually not talking about a super advanced civilization during the Ice Age. I'm not talking about a civilization that had cell phones or televisions or sent people to the moon. I'm talking about a civilization that had reached a level of knowledge that is above that we would normally expect for hunter-gatherers. And that level of knowledge includes exploration of the world and mapping of the entire world. And part of the evidence I present is ancient maps which show the world as it looked during the Ice Age, and yet which have extremely accurate relative longitudes. Longitude is a problem our civilization didn't crack until the middle of the 18th century. So the fact that there's evidence of a map-making global exploring civilization during the Ice Age immediately suggests that they had at least reached a level of technology similar to our own level of technology in the mid 18th century, and I wouldn't claim more than that. What I'm interested in is the kind of knowledge that they focused on. There's evidence for astonishingly advanced knowledge of astronomy deep in the last Ice Age, knowledge that could only result from really hundreds or thousands of years of consistent observations and detailed record keeping of those observations. I can go into more detail on that, but it particularly concerns a phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes, which changes the rising times and positions and orientation in the sky of constellations, because the Earth is the viewing platform from which we view the sky. Changes in the orientation of that platform change our perspective on the sky. And this is a regular cyclical process, but it's very, very slow. It unfolds over a period of just under 26,000 years, a complete cycle. And to observe that and calculate it precisely and have exact knowledge of it is not something that archaeologists believe happened until the time of the Greeks. Roughly 2,200 years ago, let's say. But the evidence is that it was present during the Ice Age. It's present on cave art in the Ice Age, and it's present on myths and traditions which come down from the remotest antiquity. And I'm not the only person saying this. Professor Giorgio de Santillana, who was professor of the history of science at MIT, and his co-author Hertha von Deschend, who was professor of the history of science at the University of Frankfurt, wrote an amazing book back in the 80s called Hamlet's Mill, which documents this extremely ancient knowledge of precession. And they, as a couple of historians of science, wonder out loud in their book, where did this come from? And they can only conclude that there must be some lost ancestral civilization that had accumulated and acquired this knowledge, and that fragments of it were then passed down over thousands and thousands of years and finally entered into the historical record. So I'm not talking about a civilization that's quote-unquote advanced in the way we imagine ourselves to be. I don't think we should be looking for any plastic bottles. I don't think we should be looking for any remains of motor cars. I think we're looking for a civilization that was different from our own, but that had a high level of achievement in areas that we ourselves have been, relatively latecomers to. That's the kind of perspective that I have on it. Don't look for ourselves in the past. Look for something different from ourselves, but nevertheless was capable of doing things that archaeologists tell us nobody was capable of doing at that time.
And this theory is something you've been thinking about and talking about for decades.
Yeah, I've been involved in it for a very long time. I mean, it started for me back in the 80s, when at which time I was a journalist, and my beat included Ethiopia, and I became interested in I was based in Nairobi in Kenya at that time. I was East Africa correspondent for The Economist, and I came across the Ethiopian claim to possess the lost Ark of the Covenant, which I found that archaeologists sneered at, and yet it was central to Ethiopian culture. And I began to investigate it. And as I began to look into it more deeply, I found that there was much merit to the Ethiopian claim. And eventually wrote a book about that, which was published in 1992, called The Sign and the Seal. Now, that was the first time that I'd stepped out of current affairs and used such investigative skills as I have to explore a historical mystery. And in that exploration, I became aware of two things that I hadn't been aware of before. Firstly, that archaeologists often do not do justice to the past. The sneering, condescending attitude to the Ethiopian claim to possess the Ark of the Covenant, just dismissing it out of hand without looking into all the underlying evidence that supports it, to my mind, is very shameful on the part of archaeology. They need to have more respect for the ancient traditions of cultures that they talk about. So I realized then, back in the late 80s and the early 90s, that in archaeology I was dealing with a discipline which had a particular fixed view about the past and was not willing to widen that view out in any way. And the other aspect of that investigation, well, it took me to Egypt. You can't tell the story of the Ark of the Covenant without considering the story of Moses and his Egyptian background. It took me to Egypt, and then I found myself for the first time in 1989 actually confronted by the majesty of the Great Pyramid and the mystery of it. And I was stunned. I was just awestruck by this enormous, incredibly precise, beautiful thing. And I immediately wanted to find out what are archaeologists saying about it. And I found that same kind of very narrow, very limited focus in the archaeological accounts, that they insist that the Great Pyramid was built as the tomb for a specific pharaoh. When in fact there's no evidence that it was built as a tomb for a specific pharaoh. In fact, there's 100+ pyramids in Egypt, and no body of any pharaoh has ever been found in any one of them. There was great excitement when they found a sealed chamber inside the pyramid of Zoser at Saqqara, and in it a sealed sarcophagus. And the hope was that they would find the body of a pharaoh inside there. When they broke it open, the sarcophagus was empty. It had never been looted. It was totally locked and closed, but it was empty. So there's a great mystery about these things. The evidence that the pyramids were built as tombs, particularly the Old Kingdom pyramids, particularly the pyramids of Giza, that the evidence that they were built as tombs is extremely flimsy, and yet that is the story, that is the narrative that archaeologists present. And my feeling was, I need to question this narrative. I need to look at it. Nobody's questioning this narrative. Somebody has to question it and say, well, does it really make sense when you're building a tomb for a pharaoh? Yeah, I get it that you want to build something big and impressive, but would you go to all the trouble of aligning it within a tiny fraction of a single degree of true north? I mean, that is a major technological achievement to get your pyramid, which weighs 6 million tons and has a footprint of 13 acres, aligned very precisely to true north within 3/60ths of a single degree. Nobody's going to know that. Your monument's going to look equally impressive if it's 5 degrees off true north, but the very great care that was taken to do that suggested to me that there's something going on with the heavens and the sky. And then, of course, I came across Robert Bauval's really important work, the Orion correlation theory, which shows that the pattern of the pyramids on the ground is a model of the 3 stars of the belt of the constellation of Orion. And Orion wasn't just any old constellation. It was the figure of the god Osiris in the sky, as far as the ancient Egyptians were concerned. So Egyptological arguments that this is just a random coincidence are completely defeated by the fact that the constellation chosen was the single most important constellation in the Egyptian system. And then furthermore, the orientation of the pyramids on the ground in their relation to the 3 stars of the belt in the sky only becomes perfect 12,500 years ago. It's not perfect 4,500 years ago when the pyramids are supposed to have been built. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that the pyramids were built 12,500 years ago, but what I am saying is that there was a deliberate intention to use the language of astronomy and monumental architecture to memorialize a specific time. And that specific time, when you look at the astronomy, is roughly between 12,800 years ago and 11,600 years ago. Things move slowly in the sky. It's an epoch. It's not a moment. It's an epoch of about 1,200 years. And that epoch turns out to have been a cataclysmic epoch on planet Earth. It's the epoch that geologists know as the Younger Dryas. So I've just gradually worked my way into this subject, and my purpose has been, I feel that archaeologists have enjoyed a monopoly on the narrative of the past. They are the ones that we in our civilization entrust with telling us the truth about the past. And we've got into the habit of not asking them questions, of not questioning their pronouncements about how the past worked. And I felt that there was a role and a need for somebody who, in an intelligent, thoroughly worked out, thoroughly referenced and sourced way, would question the mainstream archaeological narrative, and specifically to consider the possibility that they've missed something really big in our past. And to me, that's where all the evidence points to. It's like a black hole. You almost recognize it by its absence. There's something missing in the past, and there's loads of anomalies that come down to it, that come down from that can only be explained by a forgotten episode in the human story. So I've made it my business to be an advocate of that position, to question the mainstream narrative and to offer an alternative narrative. And I don't insist that people believe me. I just want to add it to the mixture of information that people receive, so that there's not this monopolistic control of information on our past that archaeologists have undeservedly enjoyed for the last century or so.
And what was the reaction early on, kind of fingerprints of the gods type of time? This is pre-internet as well, which is interesting.
Yeah,
and yet the book sold massively worldwide.
It did.
That's probably where you first started feeling the resistance.
Yes, it's when I first started noticing that archaeologists respond to my alternative narrative, not actually by deconstructing that narrative, but simply by making statements of authority. Hancock is wrong. 100 years of archaeology has not found any evidence for a lost civilization, therefore his claims are bogus. And then they started to add to that, Hancock is a pseudoscientist or a pseudo-archaeologist. These are labels. First of all, you come from a position of authority and say, we're archaeologists, we know everything. This man is an outsider, he's just a journalist, what does he know? Don't even listen to him. And then secondly, when you find that people are listening to him, you then attach a label to him and say he's a pseudo-archaeologist or a pseudo-scientist, as though I'm pretending to be an archaeologist or a scientist. I don't pretend to be an archaeologist or a scientist. I don't want to be an archaeologist. I am not a scientist. I am a journalist. I'm investigating a story where one narrative has controlled people's understanding of the past for far too long. And my purpose is to provide an alternative narrative, and I do so as a journalist. So I object to being called a pseudo-archaeologist or a pseudo-scientist. It's ridiculous to label me with that, but it's a very clever way to dismiss an opponent's work, is to say, oh, he's just a false example of what we really are. And just hope that people will say, oh, he's a pseudoscientist, we'll not investigate this any further. If somebody hears my name for the first time and maybe remotely interested in the ideas that I put out, the very first place they're going to go is Wikipedia.
I went there this morning.
Yeah, and the Wikipedia page will announce that I'm a promoter of pseudoscientific theories.
First line.
First line, right up there in the front. And so the purpose of that is to get people who might be interested in my work to switch off right away and not take it further. And it's a deliberate purpose, because Wikipedia pages are generally editable, but my page is not. You can't make edits on my page. There's a team of moderators who closely control the page, and anybody who attempts to edit it, all edits are rejected. The page is locked and controlled by moderators who include archaeologists and friends of archaeologists. So actually, Wikipedia is
a hive of censorship.
Wikipedia is not serving up an honest, unbiased, objective approach to my work. What Wikipedia is serving up is the view of a small group of archaeologists about my work. That's what's happening. This is not an encyclopedia in that sense. I mean, it makes me wonder. I happen to know my own story, and I happen to know, you know, the facts of that. But it makes me wonder about every other single fact that Wikipedia presents. Is the whole thing agenda-driven? Is it serving the interests of a small, specific interest group who have taken control of that page? I think Wikipedia need to change their policies. They should not allow one side of a debate to control what is supposedly an encyclopedia talking about that debate. Both sides should have their say if it's to be balanced in any way.
Yeah, Wikipedia has completely conflicting narratives all throughout that. I don't trust anything they say. And unfortunately, with the title and the name, it shows as if it promotes itself as some unbiased, objective version.
It couldn't be. That couldn't be further from the truth.
Just not true.
I know from my own experience that it is deeply biased and totally unobjective. And I suspect that that is true with many other Wikipedia articles as well. So these days, if I do want to search information on a subject and Wikipedia comes up as the first hit, I may look at what they say, but I'm going to check very carefully. I'm going to check very carefully the authenticity of what they're saying. And it's most unfortunate because Wikipedia could be a beautiful thing, but it should not taint itself by handing over pages to particular interest groups who have skin in the game and wish to put another interest group down.
And it usually gets top 5, top 10 search. That's the problem.
Always.
And people just trust it for some reason.
Yeah.
And it's just as co-opted as any other social platform with
Very
all
much
sorts
so.
of strange agendas and all sorts of strange actors in the back with false names that are trying to push their agenda. So just as a note, and I took a look this morning just because I wanted to see, and I couldn't believe the very first line. It's Graham Hancock, pseudoscientist. It's like, this guy's been writing books 30, 40 years. He's got a massive show on Netflix. He's got a massive following. And that's the way you want to introduce him to the world?
Yeah, exactly. And then when they do their coverage of the Ancient Apocalypse series, they solely quote hostile archaeologists. They don't look at anything else, as though that is just anything that an archaeologist said is an absolute unquestionable fact. That's how they present it, because that's what we're supposed to find in encyclopedias, is absolute unquestionable facts. That's what we expect to find. So if Wikipedia produces a page which cites hostile comments from archaeologists, members of the general public are going to think, oh, that's a fact. But it's not a fact. It's an agenda-driven position of a certain group of archaeologists.
Now, Graham, you've been dealing with this since the 90s. Has it changed at all over the years? No.
For years and years, it almost got quite boring, actually, the pseudoscientist thing. I've given up trying to do anything about that. There's just no point. Wikipedia cannot be persuaded at all on that, because there's a specific interest group that want me labeled as a pseudoscientist. It serves their interests, and they're the ones who protect and defend that page and don't allow any balance to be entered into it. But that's been going on for so long that I've kind of got used to it. And I think that my audience are aware. Those who know my work are aware that what Wikipedia and other archaeologist-based sources are saying is not true. But the concern obviously is that people who don't know my work and who might find my work interesting will be turned off right at the outset by this propaganda campaign. That's actually what my page on Wikipedia is. It's a propaganda campaign by a particular interest group who want to see me marginalized. What's happened with Ancient Apocalypse, with the Netflix series, is that the whole thing has ramped up to another level. I think the problem all along has been that archaeologists see me and my work as a threat to them and as a threat to public perception of who and what they are. And because my work is thoroughly researched, typically in one of my books you're going to find 2,000 footnotes. I don't state facts without referencing the source. People can follow that up and see whether the source is worthy or not. The point about it, the point about it is that I have consistently and coherently presented an alternative narrative which is thoroughly worked out and thoroughly researched. I don't just sit in an armchair. I get out into the field and investigate in the field what I'm talking about. When I wanted to write a book about sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age and the possibility that structures were submerged beneath the sea. The sea level rose 400 feet at the end of the Ice Age. 27 million square kilometers of land that were above water during the Ice Age are underwater now. Well, in order to investigate that, I did 7 years of scuba diving all over the world. I am a boots-on-the-ground researcher. So it's very offensive to me to find a Wikipedia page which says that I'm promoting pseudoscientific and pseudo-archaeological theories. I am a journalist. I do my legwork. I do it thoroughly. And because I do it thoroughly, archaeologists are threatened by it. And the response to that threat is to try to marginalize and minimalize me as much as possible, but not to engage with my work. So I was a big enough threat already with best-selling books. But now suddenly there's a Netflix series being viewed all over the world by millions of people. And this has resulted in an almost hysterical kind of immune reaction from the archaeological community, who again are not actually refuting anything that I'm saying, but they're using labels. So now the latest label is to say that Hancock's theories support racism and white supremacy.
I couldn't believe that when I read that.
I couldn't believe it either. And again, I have to say, I'm a human being with feelings. I'm married to a woman of color. I have 4 mixed-race children. I have 7 mixed-race grandchildren. To be accused in public platforms of promoting racism and white supremacy gets me right in the heart, especially when it's based on a completely flimsy and non-existent argument. So what it comes down to is that in Fingerprints of the Gods, I report back in 1995, I reported a number of indigenous traditions. Those traditions were recorded by Spaniards in Mexico and in Peru in South America shortly after the conquest. They're part of the earliest documentation that we have. And in those traditions, there were frequent references to a white-skinned, bearded figure. In South America, he's called Viracocha, and in Mexico, he's called Quetzalcoatl. And I simply reported those traditions as they had been passed down to us from the indigenous people, translated by Spanish interpreters, and then passed down into tradition. The argument of archaeologists is that by reporting those traditions, I am supporting white supremacy. To me, that argument, they're simply dismissing the local traditions. They're right. In a way, it's they who are being racist by denying these traditions, and they seem to be going back to try to rewrite the past. So the movement now, the argument now amongst archaeologists is to claim that all of those traditions were interfered with by the Spaniards, that it served the Spaniards' interests, that the bearded civilizing figure should also have a white skin. But I find no evidence for that whatsoever. I find lots of archaeologists arguing that and saying, we think this is what happened, but I don't find any facts. So I will stick with indigenous traditions that were recorded within 20 years of the conquest by major figures like Bernardino de Sahagún, who's regarded as an absolutely authentic, authoritative commentator working with indigenous peoples in Mexico right after the conquest. He reports these traditions of the white-skinned, bearded civilizer. And I'm simply passing that on to my readers. And archaeologists may wish to say that those traditions were modified by the Spaniards. They're welcome to say that, but they haven't proved it. And until it's proved, I would prefer to stick with the authenticity of the indigenous traditions, and that's what I've reported. But the funny thing is that in Ancient Apocalypse, I don't mention anything about race at all. Race is not mentioned in any way. To me, I've never understood the racist mentality. It's been my privilege and my opportunity to travel the world for almost all of my working life and to live amongst different communities of people all around the world. And what I find is that people are the same everywhere. The skin color is the least important aspect of a human being. People are the same everywhere, heart and soul, the same hopes, the same dreams, the same fears, the same ambitions. Doesn't matter if you're amongst hunter-gatherers in the Namibian desert or in the Amazon rainforest or if you're in the middle of a big city. We're all basically the same. What unites us is far greater than what divides us. And the point I often make is, why do we regard skin color as important? What is the reason for this? Skin is a large physical organ. It's supposedly the largest organ in the body. Why don't we concentrate on another large organ? Let's look at the colon, for example. Would it be rational to divide people up according to the length of their colon? You know, if you've got a colon that's half an inch shorter than somebody else's, somehow you're less advanced or less superior than them. It's a ridiculous idea to take a physical characteristic and use that as the prime definition of a human being. I think that the issue of race is fundamentally a deeply unimportant issue in this area. What we need to be doing as a human species is moving forward and realizing what unites us, our similarities. At the level of DNA, we're all incredibly closely related, but at the level of being human creatures, we're all incredibly closely related as well. And it's a false dilemma to impose race on this. Let's focus on the human creature.
Does it show you how desperate they are, the more ridiculous these claims become?
I think it does. I think it's a desperate strategy by archaeologists. So we didn't succeed in turning people off his work by calling him a pseudo-archaeologist or a pseudo-scientist. Clearly we didn't succeed in turning people off his work because he's got this Netflix show. So what can we do to turn people off his work? Oh, let's call him a racist and a white supremacist. You know, let's look at a couple of indigenous traditions that he reported 20 years ago, and let's say that on the basis of that, Hancock is a racist and a white supremacist. It's a cheap trick. It's a low blow, but that's what I've come to expect in this field. And it's odd the way that this story about the past is getting co-opted by modern American culture wars. Which is completely unnecessary. I've heard even accounts of archaeologists now who will not sex the skeletal remains of human beings who they excavate in ancient sites. They will no longer commit to saying this is a man or a woman because that might be sexist. You know, this for this kind of dialogue to enter into the archaeological field where we start using our particular modern perception, a relatively recent one, and we want to impose it on the past and we want to rewrite the past so that it fits with how we think should be today. That's a mistake. The past should be allowed to speak for itself. And when the past speaks for itself, it's beautiful, it's clear, it's open, and it tells the truth.
Humans have always tried to use history to support their current agenda, right?
Yeah.
And this is just that happening on a scientific level.
Yes, but it's so petty.
Yeah.
It's
not productive, is it?
And it's such a waste of time. How much more interesting it would be, rather than archaeology simply trying to dismiss me as a crank, as a pseudoscientist, and as a supporter of racism and white supremacy. Why not get to grips a bit with the ideas that are involved here? Why not consider the possibility that there might be a lost civilization deep in our background? The Ice Age was a very strange time. It was a very tumultuous time. And the end of the Ice Age was a huge global cataclysm. There's just no doubt about that whatsoever. And weirdly, the beginnings of what archaeologists think of as civilization begin immediately after the end of the Ice Age, 11,600 years ago, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the appearance of agriculture there. I think what we're looking at is a reboot of civilization at the end of the Ice Age. I think something was lost during the Ice Age. There were survivors. They attempted to reboot, and we're seeing the evidence for that. I don't think we're seeing the origins of civilization at the end of the Ice Age. I think we're seeing a reboot of a civilization that existed previously.
Now, why don't they go to the locations you went at each episode of the series and have these conversations with you? Because it's fascinating. You went on location in so many different places around the world. Wouldn't that be a way to debate you? And I know you've asked for someone to debate you.
Let me be clear about that. Well, yes, first of all, I'm very willing to debate. There is a particular archaeologist who's called John Hoops at the University of Kansas, who's been stalking my work for 30 years, very much involved in the pseudo-archaeologist and pseudo-scientist thing, and who even before the Netflix series was released, had Kansas University put out a press release saying that he was ready to talk to the press about how my work supports racism and white supremacy. This is even before he's seen the series, a series which, once he's seen it, he discovers that there is actually no mention of race whatsoever in the series. Then he claims to know my mind and says that Hancock is simply cleverly disguising his racist views by not mentioning him. So whether I mention race or not, he's determined to label me as a racist and as a white supremacist. Now, when I was on the Joe Rogan Experience with Randall Carlson and Joe a few weeks ago, Joe suggested, why not have a debate? And we've done a debate on the Joe Rogan Show before with Michael Shermer, which was quite an interesting debate, actually.
Yeah, it's good.
And we put out that call, but it became clear to me that the majority of archaeologists who'd responded to that call were not people who'd been engaged with my work, were not people who had been following my work for 30 years, who pronounced themselves in a press release as an expert on my work, and who'd labeled me as a racist and white supremacist. So my feeling was, the person I want to debate live on the Joe Rogan Experience in front of millions of people is John Hoops from the University of Kansas. Let him put his money where his mouth is. He's been saying all these things about me from behind his keyboard. He's been doing everything possible to smear my name and my reputation. If he really feels strongly about it, if he really has something to support what he's saying, let him sit in front of me in a live recorded debate. Let him sit in front of me and we'll talk it out face to face. So I issued that invitation and he immediately declined. He says, I have nothing to debate with you. I don't debate metaphysics with science. But he's willing to spend 30 years smearing my work, but he's not willing to meet me face to face. That, in my view, I call a spade a spade. That is cowardice. That is intellectual cowardice. The unwillingness to back up one's loud mouth in a face-to-face encounter is cowardice. And I'm not going to debate any other archaeologist live on Joe Rogan's show. The moment that John Hoops, my principal critic, chooses to come out of the shadows and meet me face to face, I will debate him on the Joe Rogan Experience, and Joe has made that platform available for that. But I don't want any of these other minor figures who are simply trying to ride off my reputation to boost their own profile. I want the main antagonist, and that's John Hoops from the University of Kansas, and John Hoops from the University of Kansas is a coward.
And I would say, John, if you're watching and listening to this, you probably will, is that you'll get a fair shot on that show, and Joe's had you and Shermer before, and that's actually probably one of the fairest places you could go and have an open-ended debate where you could talk for 2-3 hours and really get to the heart of it. And it's probably the best chance you would have. For
exactly. If John Hoops believes so strongly in his own position, he's got an incredible opportunity to put it forward there. He's got the opportunity, if he's in a strong position, he's got the opportunity to defeat me in a debate, to do a great service for archaeology, which he claims to be doing. But he won't do it. And that speaks to me of something very strange about this individual and about archaeology in general, because the best way to sort out a disagreement like this is face-to-face in a 3-hour conversation. Then the weaknesses and flaws in each side will become apparent. They can't be hidden in any way. And I'm ready for that, but unfortunately, my principal archaeological critic, John Hoops from the University of Kansas, is too cowardly to participate in that debate.
Well, I encourage the rest of the community that is throwing, darts and arrows at you to encourage him to do this so we can just get this played out. Let me ask you a question. Do you find the younger archaeologists, the students that are starting off, to at least have more of an open mind to your work, or they might engage with that work? Or is that institution in this camp that we can only exist and continue to get funded, which might be an issue as well if they completely don't engage with the work?
It's complicated. I have come into contact with quite a number of younger archaeologists working on digs at various sites that I've visited, and I've had some very freewheeling, open, off-the-record conversations with those individuals, and many of them have read my work, and many of them say that they're interested, that they're interested in the idea of a forgotten episode in the human story during the Ice Age. But they're not in a position to do anything with it, because the moment they start trying to do something with that, they're going to bump head on into the senior archaeologists upon whom their future depends. Will they get grants for their field work? Will they get promotions? all of that will be stripped away if they start even looking into the claims that I'm making of a forgotten episode in human history. So institutionally, it's very difficult for young archaeologists, even though they may disagree with the system. It's very difficult for them if they want to pursue a successful career in archaeology. It's very difficult for them to turn against the paradigm, to turn against the mainstream narrative. And there's so many examples of this where archaeologists have had the guts to actually say, I think we've got things wrong and we need to look again. And the classic example, so recent, is the claim of archaeology that a culture that they know as the Clovis culture were the first inhabitants of the Americas. The so-called Clovis first theory, which dominated American archaeology for 50 years, claims that there were no human beings in the Americas before 13,400 years ago, and that this so-called Clovis culture, which is only called the Clovis culture, we don't know what they called themselves, but the first artifacts associated with this culture were found at a place called Blackwater Draw in New Mexico, and the town of Clovis is nearby there. And that's where the archaeologists used to go to get a drink. So they called it the Clovis culture. We don't know what that culture called itself. They made beautiful spear points and arrowheads from flint and other materials. So the artifactual evidence for their presence begins 13,400 years ago and ends dramatically 12,800 years ago, which is the beginning of the Younger Dryas cataclysm. And for decades, it was the absolutely rigid and fixed mainstream view of archaeology that there were no human beings in the Americas before Clovis, none before 13,400 years ago. Then Jacques Cinq-Mars up in the Yukon finds evidence, compelling evidence, that human beings have been in the Americas for at least 24,000 years. Okay, what happens to him is that his career is destroyed. This is in the 80s and 90s. He's putting out these new finds that he's made at Bluefish Caves in the Yukon. And what happens to him is that his colleagues in archaeology literally destroy his career. Nobody will speak to him. He's shunned in corridors if he passes colleagues. His research funding is stripped away. He's accused of all sorts of malfaisance, as though he's somehow making the whole thing up. Exactly the same kind of shit that's being poured at me. And then, as the years pass, a new excavation is done at Bluefish Caves, and lo and behold, it's suddenly recognized Jacques Cinq-Mars was right. Too late to save him from the humiliation and the destruction that he went through. So there's a lesson for every archaeologist in what happened to Jacques Cinq-Mars. If you go against the mainstream, you are going to pay a very heavy price for it. And therefore, most young archaeologists have no incentive to go against the mainstream, even though in their hearts they may know that there is something to be done. And the funny thing with the Clovis first model now is, archaeologists are now, it's typical of this. They're now saying, oh, we knew it all along. We always thought there were people in Americas before Clovis. And we got rid of that debate in the 1990s. Rubbish. There are still stories being published today saying Clovis first model finally debunked. Stories published in 2022. You know, this is it's like a zombie that keeps on popping up again. It still has its advocates. And to claim that archaeology got rid of that in the 1990s is ridiculous. It remained a strong thesis in archaeology right through into 2010, even 2015.
Academia is such a strange place. It's so Orwellian, and I've had conversations over the years, and I've talked to people in academics sometimes when it comes to even psychedelics, and they said, I can't talk about that. I'll lose everything in there. And I think we have our experiences at university, and we just think that there's all this, everyone doing good there, but it's a very treacherous and dangerous place to be if you speak out.
It's a very treacherous and dangerous place to be because particular theories, and I think it's probably true across all the sciences, but I think it's particularly true with archaeology. And there I have to raise a question mark over whether archaeology is rightly defined as a science at all. I'm not sure that it is a science because there's so many things about it that can't be tested in scientific ways. Basically, what archaeologists are doing is they're dealing with relatively small amounts of material that are dug up out of the ground from relatively small amounts of sites. And they are then drawing conclusions from that, which are their conclusions, which they then present as a narrative which magically transforms into statements of fact. These are not statements of fact, they're statements of opinion based on a particular interpretation of a particular set of artifacts. That's what we're dealing with archaeology, and I don't think that that's science. Particularly so when it comes to prehistory, when it comes to the time of the Ice Age. Really, you move from the domain of archaeology into history the moment that you start having written documents. When you have written documents that have survived, if you can translate those documents, and you can't always, we have never translated the Indus Valley script, for example, but when you can translate them, you can begin to get a fair sense of how history was unfolding at that time. But from a time where no documents have survived, from the Ice Age.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.